Hello, my name is Simon, and welcome to Simonize's Rogue Sheet for kids who can't raid good and want to learn to do other stuff good to video guide. This guide is current as of September 29th, 2020, and this will be the advanced options guide. We'll get into more of the finicky details and some of the cool features of the sheet. If you're looking for the basic guide, that will be linked in the description of this video. If you haven't seen that one yet, I advise reading that one first, because we'll skip over all the basic information in this video. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of these extra tables that exist on the spreadsheet that give you some extra information. The first one is the DPS breakdown table on the main tab. It breaks down your different sources of damage and gives you a percentage of total. So you can see kind of the weight of how significant your main hand auto attack is, your offhand auto attack, how many Sinister Strikes. This updates to backstab. If you're ever using a dagger in the main hand, you can see if I switch this, it'll become backstab and change a bunch of stuff. Your eviscerates, extra attacks, blade flurry. The blade flurry figure is for secondary cleaving targets, and you need to have the advanced options set to multiple targets, or else it's always going to be 0. Instant poison, and then miscellaneous is damage includes damage from weapon procs and set bonuses like 8 of 8 Bloodfang. It's the miscellaneous stuff, and you can see a lot of these have little black triangles. If you mouse over these cells, you get text pop-ups that explain the options or explain something about that cell. Next up, we have an energy usage warning. This is basically only comes into play on very short fights. If I set it to 15, it'll tell me that I'm wasting energy. That means I'm generating more energy than I can spend, which is a bad thing. And you can see, if you click over to the cooldown tab, it shows you where and when everything's happening. It says you're wasting energy in the opening 5 seconds. So when that happens, you might want to move around some of your abilities. Like you might want to move Blade Flurry. But we'll get to that later when we cover the cooldowns tab. So let's just set it back to 60 seconds. Normally, you can ignore this unless it turns red. Then you should do something about it. Next is average ability damage. This is just your combo point builder and your slice and dice gain. There's a separate figure for the combo point builder and the combo point builder with procs. The with procs figure considers the damage of Sinister Strike or Backstab plus the average damage gained from all the procs that could trigger from using the ability. This is a better figure for deciding when to press Sinister Strike or Backstab. And it gives you the damage per energy, the DPE, of those abilities. So that's average damage divided by average cost. The next is a breakdown of your different finishing moves. The Slice and Dice finishing moves assume that you spend the entire time attacking the enemy, that you have full uptime for the duration of the Slice and Dice. This first section, first column on the left, is without combo point builders factored in. It's just you have 5 combo points and you do the finishing move. This is how much damage it does, and then this is the damage per energy that it does. And you have the same thing for eviscerates. This half of the table is with builders. So this calculates the total cost of the average number of combo point builders you would need to do that particular finishing move and the damage of the finishing move. And so then you have total cost of the builders and finishing move, and you have total damage of the builders and the finishing move. And then you have another damage per energy figure over here. Next table we've got is a Dark Mantle procs. This table gives you a specific percentage chance to get a specific number of procs. And we don't have Dark Mantle foreset enabled, so the number of procs 0 is at 100%. Just to make this table interesting, we're going to put a little bit of Dark Mantle on so we can see it actually do something. There we go. Okay, so on a 60-second fight with these settings, it's saying I have a 5.68% chance to get no procs. And if I get 0 procs, my DPS should be about 1,199. And that is 52 DPS below the average DPS that I would do with the average number of procs, which is 3.2. And you can look and see that it's kind of a bell curve around the average, which makes sense. It should be. And the change from average goes from negative when you get less than the average number of procs up to positive when you have more than the average number of procs. And you can see these individual chances that all add up to 100. Next is Veilstress mode information. It gives you the average damage of your combo point builder, which is the same figure as this. It gives you the average damage of a 5-point eviscerate, which is the same figure as this. And it gives you a figure of how many seconds worth of slice and dice is equivalent to using one combo point builder. This is only looking at the damage output, because in Veilstress mode, your energy is unlimited. You don't have to worry about energy cost. So this is saying that if I were to roll up to Veilstress with a sword equipped, which is a bad idea, and I had to make a decision between getting, say, 6 seconds of slice and dice uptime or using that global cooldown to just press another Sinister Strike, it's saying I should use the slice and dice because it only takes 4.7 seconds to break even. And in this made-up scenario, I would get 6 seconds of slice and dice. So slice and dice would be the correct option. The last table I want to talk about is the stat weights table. I don't think stat weights are a good way to compare items, and you can see I explain why that is here. They're a poor way to compare items because they ignore the changing value of each stat as you gain or lose other stats, and they also ignore the changing value of an individual stat that has relevant caps and limits. That being said, to get accurate stat weights, you must run the update stat weights macro every time you change any settings to get accurate values for the stat weights. And that is a perfect segue into the macros section that I want to talk about. To access any of the macros in the spreadsheet, you want to go up here to Tools, left-click, Macros, and then there's a list of macros. Talents, Combat Daggers, Swords, and Seal Fate are talent presets. You can click these, and it'll shuffle all the talents around and your ability rotation around to be set up for Combat Daggers, Combat Swords, or Seal Fate. It doesn't change your gear. Update Stat Weights is the macro that we want. So you can click that, and it'll run script. Right now, this is a fresh copy of this spreadsheet. I haven't allowed it to use macros yet. So it's going to try to run this, and then it's just going to not do anything. And it's going to ask for authorization like this. A script attached to this document needs your permission to run. Press continue. It gives me another pop-up. It says, choose an account to sign into. And you click your account, and you click allow. Now, it didn't actually run the sheet. I just gave it permission. Now I have to do this again. So, this is what our stat weights were. We already changed the gear around. So now when we run this stat weights macro, it's going to take a moment. It's going to fiddle through some stuff. I'm not pressing any buttons right now. It's just doing its thing. And then it comes back here. And now our stat weights are different because we changed gear. So obviously the stat weights are different. There are other useful macros, much more useful than the stat weights one. Like I said, the combat daggers, seal fate, and swords macros change around the talents, so I just set it to seal fate spec, change my DPS, and it also changed the rotation. I can set it to daggers, even though I'm still swords, and I can set it back to swords like it ought to be. The other macros are super useful as well. These 4 macros are for saving and loading gear setups. And that moves us on to the comparison tab. Down here, there's a tab that says comparison. It has current setup, save setup 2, save setup 1. There's a big list of gear. It has your DPS readouts. Then it has your gear enchants. It has your talents. It saves your all your settings that are relevant to damage output. Your buffs, your advanced options. So right now, this is my current setup, and it's different than both of the saved setups. I'm going to save it on top of saved setup 2. So I'm going to go save current to setup number 2. And I click this, and then it chugs away. I'm not clicking any buttons. It's just plugging through this, pasting the correct data in, and now it's done. So now I look, current setup is the same as saved setup. But say I wanted to look at this one, which is my best in slot for swords this phase. What I can do is I can go tools, macros, load saved setup number 1 to current. This macro takes it from the comparison tab and loads it into the main tab. So I do that, and it chugs through all these options. And now I have Grand Marshal weapons and Jam Gabar and Badge of the Swarm Guard and all this stuff. You see, and my DPS is way higher. Now say I decide, okay, I'm just not going to get Bloodfang Bracers. Okay, that's a pretty small difference in damage output. Let's say, okay, that's unreasonable. I'm not going to get Grand Marshal weapons. That's crazy. I'm going to get Ravencrest Legacy because it's cool. Let's see, is it better than that? Nope. Okay, so now I've made a change to that saved setup. Maybe I want to save it again. So I can go save current to setup number 1. I changed the weapons and I changed the bracers. Sometimes it chugs through this very quickly. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it struggles. So now, my saved setup number 1 has Ancient Karaji Ripper, Ravencrest Legacy, and Bloodfang Bracers. So perfect. You can use these 2 setups and your current setup and those save and load macros to easily compare sets. The next thing I want to talk about is this next tab over here, the Cooldowns tab. This tab is very exciting. In this tab, every 5 seconds of the fight is broken down into its separate calculation category. And you can stack your temporary buffs however you want. There are automatic settings that line everything up to be pretty close to optimal. It should be optimal in almost all circumstances, but not quite everyone. You can change the timing of your different abilities or your different cooldowns on this cooldowns tab. You change it from automatic, and then this is the start time. So for this Badge of the Swarm Guard, I could start it at 10 seconds instead of 0. And when I do that, you see it moves over like that. And maybe I want to time the Jam Gabar differently. Maybe I want to start that at 15 seconds instead. And then you've got a display for each 5-second period, your DPS is summarized. And you can see that like the period where we use Thistletea is way higher than all the other ones, obviously. The periods where, Badge of the Swarm Guard is active is a little higher than the one where it's not. Jom Gabar is higher than the ones where it's not. And you can play around with how you stack your different abilities. Like, let's say we had Renataki's instead of Badge of the Swarm Guard. Renataki's gives you energy. It doesn't really interact with haste or other energy effects. So, if we timed Renataki's to be on, say, 15 seconds, and then Jom Gabar would have to be later, 30 seconds. Well, it doesn't have to be that late, but this is a worse setup than having Jom Gabar on top of Blade Flurry and Adrenaline Rush, because these effects interact well with Jom Gabar, and this does not. So you can see here, your DPS goes down if you use these cooldowns differently. So this is a great way to explore, how you want to time your different cooldowns and active effects and seeing how much difference it really makes. There's also an option for Fungal Bloom. Fungal Bloom is an effect that comes in the Lotheb encounter in Naxxramas. It's a debuff that you get for 90 seconds that greatly increases your critical strike chance. So let's say I get my first one 30 seconds into the encounter. You can see my DPS shoots way up when I have this active compared to when I don't. Because it's very good to have a lot more critical strike chance, obviously. And you can have multiple applications of it timed at different times. By default, it's all set to off. You can also put downtime into the cooldowns tab. In each 5-second period, you can have up to 5 seconds of downtime. That's not attacking a boss. So like during the Twin Emperors encounter, you spend a lot of time running back and forth. So you might take this sheet and say, 20 seconds of uptime, and then 8 seconds of downtime, and then 20 seconds-ish, and then 8 more seconds of downtime, and then you'd probably extend the fight a lot longer. You end up capping and wasting some energy, of course, because Adrenaline Rush is active there. Yeah, that's bad. So you'd want to time Adrenaline Rush differently. Put it, whoops, like that. And then it's better. You can also do intentional energy pooling. Uh-oh, what? Oh, it's trying to reconnect. Okay, that's why that happened. You can use energy pooling to not spend a percentage of the energy that you generate in any particular 5-second period. You might want to pool energy during Jom Gabar so you can spend more energy at the end of it and less energy at the start of it. This usually makes a very small difference in your damage output, but the option is there in case you want to do that. Right now it's still trying to reconnect, so I can't show you the actual effect of changing this. But we're going to press on to the advanced options section, and I'm just going to say a couple words about each of these different advanced options. Will you time your abilities to be right after your main hand auto attacks outside of Adrenaline Rush? Some people want to time their abilities with their main hand swing because of the way that interacts with extra attack effects. It usually, for Alliance, it makes a very small difference. For Horde that are using Wind Fury, it makes a more substantial difference. And there's a separate option to do that during Adrenaline Rush and not during Adrenaline Rush. If you checked either of those for yes, what is the delay between the main hand attack landing and ability being used? The smaller the delay, the better. You can change that. Will you time your Adrenaline Rush to be with Crusader procs? You can choose to time it with 1 proc or 1.5 procs. and you need to have Crusader Enchants available for this to do anything. This is just an example of essentially waiting for Crusader to proc before you hit Adrenaline Rush. Again, like most of these options, it's a somewhat minor effect, but it's a fringe case where you might want to do that sometimes. How many targets will your AoE effects hit? This, you have to type in a bigger number, and you can type it into whatever you want. But you see, when you do that, you get Blade Flurry cleaving. You know, extra damage from secondary targets of Blade Flurry. It'll also affect how much damage you get from Dragon Breath Chili. So with 5 targets, Dragon Breath Chili is giving me about 20 DPS. But if I put it down to only 1 target, Dragon Breath Chili gives me only about 4 DPS. And also, Ramstein's Lightning Bolts will be affected by this number of targets. What percentage of Dark Mantle energy proc will you be able to utilize outside of Adrenaline Rush? This is a percentage of each Dark Mantle energy proc that you'll actually convert into abilities. Sometimes, when you get a Dark Mantle energy proc, you're already near full energy, and some of it is wasted. So that's why there's a percentage that isn't just 100%. I thought it was a silly thing to try to calculate how often you would waste energy, because it depends so much on your play and so many different circumstances. So I just left it as an option for the user, and the default is 90%. This option, what percentage of mid-fight downtime do you have Slice and Dice active, is kind of a weird thing. It's really almost irrelevant. When you have mid-fight downtime, the sheet's going to assume you have Slice and Dice active for some percentage of this time, and it's going to plan your ability usage accordingly. You can adjust how much time you have Slice and Dice up during downtime. And the lower you make this number, the higher your DPS is going to be. How much energy will you gain from Thistle Tea? This is useful for figuring out, like, is it good for me to hit a 70 energy Thistle Tea during Jamgabar, or wait until later when I could get 90 or 95 energy from it? You can change this around and, move the Thistle Tea around on the Cooldowns tab and figure that out. How much energy will be wasted at the end of the fight or before 9 seconds of downtime? It's assumed that if you have 9 consecutive seconds of downtime, that you're going to energy cap. And at the end of a fight, you don't always spend all of your energy. This is just an estimation of how much energy you're going to be left over with. So the sheet is not converting that energy into damage. These next 4 settings refer to the Expose Armor rotation option. There's a percentage reduction factor for Dark Mantle, Ruthlessness, and Seal Fate. And these lower the benefit of these effects specifically for the ability usage planning during Expose Armor application. You can't really rely on these effects to behave exactly average when you're applying Expose Armor. Sometimes you need to play it safe. So when you want to play it safe, you might reduce these effects by a percentage to simulate, getting a little bit unlucky with them. The next are some spell settings. Immunity to Fire, Nature, Shadow, Resistance to Fire, Nature, Shadow. Then there's some debuff settings. Thunder, Fury, Nature Resistance, Curse of Elements, Curse of Shadows. How many stacks of Improved Scorch? These are fairly self-explanatory. What percentage of the Hemorrhage debuff's damage should be attributed to you? So this Hemorrhage debuff has 30 charges and increases physical damage taken by 7. Other people will hit the target and get that damage bonus and consume charges. So you can change this from 0 to 100%, and it'll attribute more or less of that debuff damage to you. Mob type was covered in the basic video. There are a couple of effects that care about mob type. Murder Talent, Seal of the Dawn trinket, Mark of the Champion trinket, Troll, Racial Beast damage. This option, would you like to use iterative calculations? There's a note here that says what this affects. It affects Empyrean Demolisher, Bone Scythe 8-piece bonus while you have Seal Fate. And it affects Dark Mantle calculations during Expose Armor rotation. If you want to use iterative calculations, you also have to enable iterative calculations in the sheet. The reason this is not enabled by default is because it causes lag and some weird behavior, and is really not needed for a lot of things. For all of these effects that iterative calculations influence, there's a default approximation that makes it pretty good to use without iterative calculations, and iterative calculations just improve the accuracy of the modeling of those effects. So if I click to enable iterative calculations, right now I'm not using any of those effects, but let's put Empyrean Demolisher in my main hand. It's going to error out the entire sheet because I haven't gone up here to File, Spreadsheet Settings, Calculation, Iterative Calculation, On, and this is a fine setup, 15 and 0.01. Now it'll all work. And you see it change, those numbers kind of chug through. That's where it's doing its different iterations. You don't need to use iterative calculations on this sheet. You can if you want. How many ranks? The rest are actually self-explanatory. Ranks of Improved Blessing of Might for Paladins. You know, do they have the Encourage book, Improved Battle Shout, Improved Mark of the Wild, Shamans, Enhancing Totem, Grace of Air, Uptime. How many ranks of Improved Weapons Totem talent do your Shamans have? Currently, this talent is bugged in the game, and it doesn't actually do anything. That's why it's always set to 0. However, in the sheet, it's modeled correctly. So you can set it and see how much benefit it would give you if it wasn't bugged in-game. It doesn't actually do anything in-game. That brings me to the end of the advanced options video. I hope this didn't drone on too long, and I hope you learned something about how to better use this spreadsheet and all the different features and settings that you can do. You can do something awful like this, using Thistletea when you're not even attacking. That's awful, but you can do it, and that's sweet. And here, look, you can pool energy. Boom. And it shifts your damage from there over to there because you pooled energy. Perfect. Great. Well, thank you for watching. I'll have a link to this spreadsheet, the Classic Rogue Discord, and my Rogue Guide in the description of this video. You can contact me on the Classic Rogue Discord if you have any questions about this. Thank you. Have a nice day and enjoy playing World of Warcraft. It's a great game.